By the early 1980s, slashers were everywhere. The big franchises had already claimed the spotlight, turning mass killers into household names and body counts into box office success. But just beneath that surface was another world of smaller films, stranger ideas, and a flood of independent productions that were often far less predictable. These were the movies hiding on the bottom shelf of the video store, the ones with faded box art, strange titles, and a promise of something a little nastier than the mainstream was willing to deliver. Tonight, we're stepping into that corner of horror to look at 10 deep-cut slashers, the films that traded polish for atmosphere and big budgets for raw creativity. From empty school hallways after dark to isolated cabins, forgotten campgrounds, and quiet stretches of backroad wilderness, these stories found new ways to make familiar places feel dangerous.
Just Before Dawn, 1981. Deep in the Oregon wilderness, 5 young campers discover that some mountains are meant to stay untamed. When they ignore warnings from a crazed local about demons in the woods, they find themselves hunted by something that's both more primitive and more cunning than any backwoods legend. This isn't just another camping trip gone wrong, it's a survival story where civilization's rules mean nothing against ancient savagery. What elevates Just Before Dawn above standard wilderness slashers is director Jeff Lieberman's commitment to atmosphere and environment. The film treats its forest setting with documentary-like attention to detail, making the wilderness itself feel like an alien world hostile to human presence. Fog-shrouded mountains and rushing rivers aren't just backdrops, they're active participants in the horror. The film's antagonists offer a fresh take on the backwoods killer formula. Instead of the standard deformed hillbilly, we get something more primal and unsettling. The way they move through the forest, their ability to mimic sounds, and their almost supernatural understanding of the terrain suggest creatures that have evolved specifically to hunt in these woods. Greg Henry and Chris Lemmon lead a cast that brings surprising depth to what could have been standard victim roles. Their characters feel like real outdoor enthusiasts who make mostly sensible decisions, which makes their situation even more terrifying when those sensible decisions prove useless against an enemy that doesn't play by civilized rules. The kills in Just Before Dawn aren't just about creative gore. They're studies in mounting dread and environmental horror. The film uses its natural setting to full effect, turning familiar outdoor activities like rock climbing and river crossing into sequences of almost unbearable tension. The finale, featuring one of horror's most unique methods of defeating a killer, proves that sometimes survival requires embracing our own primitive instincts. Just Before Dawn reminds us that nature isn't just indifferent to human presence. Sometimes it actively works to expel us, using tools that have been waiting in the mountains since before we learned to make fire. Edge of the Axe, 1988. A rural mountain community in Northern California becomes a paranoid hunting ground when a faceless maniac in a featureless white mask begins a brutal killing spree. Armed with a heavy wood-chopping axe, the killer ambushes unsuspecting locals in isolated cars, country roads, and even an automated car wash. As the body count rises, a tech-savvy local named Gerald and his girlfriend Lillian use a primitive computer program to analyze data and track the killer's geographical patterns. Their digital investigation quickly uncovers a web of deep-seated small-town grudges, turning everyone in the community into a suspect. Spanish director José Ramón Larraz brings a distinct European flavor to this international co-production, transforming mundane suburban spaces into sites of absolute terror. The pacing shifts effortlessly from dialogue-driven detective work to sudden, explosive bursts of violence. By trading standard teen party tropes for a tense whodunit structure, the film creates an atmosphere of pure isolation. Barton Fawkes and Christina Marie Lane anchor the film with a natural, grounded chemistry that makes their amateur detective work genuinely engaging. It stands as an overlooked gem that perfectly bridges the gap between American body count slashers and atmospheric European thrillers. For collectors of retro horror, this remains a sharp, tech-infused artifact of the late 80s. Hide and Go Shriek, 1988. When a group of teenagers decides to celebrate their high school graduation with an after-hours party inside a sprawling furniture store, it seems like harmless fun. Drinks, dares, and even a few forbidden hookups are all on the agenda. But once the lights go out and the doors are locked, the party takes a deadly turn. A killer is stalking the aisles, turning the store's mannequins, mirrors, and showrooms into tools of terror. Hide-and-go Shriek takes the slasher formula and gives it a unique setting that's both playful and unnerving. The endless rows of beds, wardrobes, and mannequins create a labyrinth where shadows play tricks, and hiding places can quickly become death traps. It's a clever twist on the classic locked-in overnight premise, grounding the suspense in a setting everyone recognizes but suddenly can't trust. The film thrives on its atmosphere, fluorescent lights flickering above, mannequins seeming to breathe in the dark, and the eerie quiet of a building that should be empty. When the violence erupts, it's raw and brutal, punctuating the tension with a grim reminder that this isn't just a game of hide-and-seek. What makes it linger is the way it edges into darker territory than expected. Beneath the surface-level thrills, the killer's motives and identity bring a disturbing twist, tying the murders into themes of repression, sexuality, and hidden identity. That layer of subtext makes the film stand out from its peers, elevating it from a simple slasher to something more memorable. Hide-and-go Shriek may not have broken through to mainstream horror fame, but for fans of inventive 80s slashers, it delivers exactly what the title promises: a deadly game where every corner hides the possibility of bloodshed. Final Exam, 1981. During exam week at a college campus, students begin dying at the hands of a killer with no clear motive, identity, or explanation. As pranks and parties distract security, real violence escalates quietly. There are no clues to solve, and no mystery to unravel, only the growing realization that someone is killing at random, and no one is prepared to stop it. Directed by Jimmy Houston, Final Exam stands out for what it refuses to provide. The killer has no backstory, no psychology, and no reveal. The ensemble cast portrays recognizable college archetypes, but the film spends more time on everyday interactions than expected, making the sudden violence feel intrusive rather than sensational. The kills are simple and abrupt, stabbings and strangulations, staged with practical effects that favor realism over spectacle. Empty dorms, isolated buildings, and late-night campus spaces become dangerous simply because no one is paying attention. Final Exam divides audiences. Some appreciate its restraint and character focus, while others find it uneventful. Its minimalism is deliberate, stripping the slasher formula to its bare bones. Not flashy, but quietly unsettling in its refusal to explain itself. Blood Rage, 1987. If you were flipping through the horror section of your local video store in the late 80s, chances are the lurid cover of Blood Rage caught your eye. Set around Thanksgiving, a holiday rarely touched by horror, it delivers a family gathering gone horribly wrong, where twin brothers, one institutionalized and the other hiding his murderous streak, turn a suburban apartment complex into a blood-soaked battleground. Mark Soper pulls double duty as both twins, the unhinged Terry and the wrongly accused Todd, giving the movie its central hook. Louise Lasser plays their increasingly unstable mother, whose breakdowns add a bizarre layer of dark comedy to the chaos. But the real draw for late-night audiences and horror hounds was the gore. With outrageous kills, severed limbs, and gallons of fake blood, Blood Rage went all in on the splatter. Its campy dialogue and over-the-top violence made it exactly the kind of cult favorite that thrived on VHS shelves and midnight marathons. Though dismissed by critics at the time, Blood Rage has since earned its place as one of the most outrageous slashers of the decade. For fans of offbeat 80s horror, it's a messy, bloody, and oddly entertaining reminder that sometimes the weirdest movies are the most fun to discover. Absurd, 1981. A nearly unkillable murderer breaks free from a pursuing priest and continues a violent spree after surviving injuries that should be fatal. Even a catastrophic wound fails to stop him. After recovering in a hospital, He turns on the staff and then moves into a quiet neighborhood where a babysitter and a disabled girl become trapped in his path. The priest follows, knowing ordinary methods will not bring him down. The film plays like a loose companion piece to Anthropophagus, again featuring George Eastman as the central threat. This time the character is defined less by motive and more by endurance, presented as a relentless, almost unstoppable force. Most supporting roles are built around the home under siege setup. Director Joe D'Amato keeps the story simple and pushes the shock value forward. The pacing is built around pursuit and attack sequences rather than mystery. Dialogue is minimal. Tension comes from inevitability. Effects are practical and graphic, featuring multiple mechanical weapon kills and detailed wound makeup. Several scenes use power tools and bladed weapons, staged with lingering close-ups. A raw example of early 80s Italian splatter cinema. Story is secondary to impact, with the emphasis squarely on brutality and endurance horror. Best suited for viewers exploring extreme corners of the genre. Intruder, 1989. It's closing time at a small-town supermarket, but for the overnight stock crew the night is just beginning, and it won't end well. As they restock shelves and prepare for the next day, a mysterious killer lurks in the aisles, turning the store into a bloody hunting ground. One by one, employees are picked off in increasingly gruesome fashion, leaving only a few to fight for survival. Directed by Scott Spiegel, Intruder is a late 80s slasher that has earned a reputation for its inventive kills and wild camera work. The cast features Elizabeth Cox as the lead, alongside appearances from Renee Estevez, Dan Hicks, and even cult icons Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi in small but memorable roles. What makes Intruder unforgettable are its set pieces. Spiegel and his crew find creative ways to turn everyday supermarket equipment into instruments of carnage. Box balers, meat slicers, and power saws are all used to horrifying effect. The gore, handled by KNB-EFX Group in one of their early projects, is over-the-top and practical, cementing the film as a splatter classic. Visually, the film is stylish and experimental, with Spiegel using extreme camera angles, POV shots, and clever edits that give the slasher formula fresh energy. It's both brutal and playful, a mix that makes the mayhem oddly entertaining. Though modest in scope, Intruder thrives as a VHS-era favorite, delivering everything slasher fans crave: a tight setting, memorable kills, and just enough camp to balance out the horror. It's proof that sometimes the most ordinary places can hide the deadliest nightmares. Offerings, 1989. Dripping with low-budget regional charm and heavily inspired by the minimalist pacing of John Carpenter's original Halloween, this obscure independent slasher brings an incredibly literal meaning to the concept of gift-giving. The narrative follows John Radley, a severely traumatized young man who spent a decade locked away in the Oakhurst State Mental Hospital after childhood bullies pushed him down a deep well, causing permanent, severe brain damage. After staging a quiet escape from the sterile institution, John returns to his old neighborhood to systematically stalk and murder the now college-age bullies who ruined his youth. Driven by a twisted sense of romantic devotion, he begins harvesting his victims' body parts and leaving them as bloody offerings on the doorstep of Gretchen, the only local girl who ever showed him genuine kindness. Writer and director Christopher Reynolds leans hard into a stark, threadbare B-movie aesthetic, compensating for a razor-thin budget by maximizing heavy shadow play and long, creeping point-of-view camera shots. The film deliberately avoids the fast-paced music video editing style of its late 80s contemporaries, opting instead for long, steady takes that linger on dark suburban backyards, empty hallways, and quiet living rooms to build an old-school atmosphere of stalking dread. Reynolds even utilizes a haunting, repetitive electronic synthesizer score that directly mimics classic slasher themes, wrapping the entire production in a familiar, comforting late-night video rental vibe. The focus stays entirely on the methodical, slow-burn execution of the killer's revenge plot within a small, sleepy town. Loretta Lee Bowman anchors the narrative's emotional stakes as Gretchen, conveying a grounded, relatable vulnerability as she attempts to piece together the bizarre, horrific connection between her new admirer and the missing people around her. Jerry Brewer steps into the classic Dr. Loomis role as Jim Paxton, a hyper-serious college professor specializing in violent behavior who tries to track down John before the body count rises any higher. The film relies entirely on practical, old-school gore gags and physical dummy effects to deliver its gruesome punchlines, ensuring that each delivery to Gretchen's porch hits with independent horror charm. It remains a definitive artifact of the twilight of the 1980s video store boom, a proudly derivative, micro-budget stalk-and-kill feature made exclusively for hardcore genre completionists. Hell High, 1989. Teenage delinquency takes a deeply unsettling psychological turn in this gritty, mean-spirited late 80s slasher that feels like a cross between Class of 1984 and a home invasion thriller. The story focuses on Miss Brooks Storm, a tightly wound, deeply neurotic high school biology teacher who is intensely disliked by her cruel students. When a group of 4 rebellious teens decides to pull a vicious, terrifying prank on her at her isolated home, they wear Halloween masks and take the harassment entirely too far. Believing they have accidentally killed her during the assault, the teens panic and scramble to cover their tracks. However, the severe trauma triggers a latent, violent, psychotic break from Brooks' own dark childhood past, causing her to stand up, pick up a weapon, and systematically hunt down her abusers. Director Douglas Grossman crafts a surprisingly bleak, atmospheric piece of regional exploitation cinema that stands out from the era's more lighthearted, comedic slashers. Opting for a dark, autumnal color palette and stark, naturally lit environments, Grossman infuses the high school hallways and dense woods with a heavy sense of real-world isolation. Rather than leaning on rapid-fire supernatural tricks, the visual framing stays uncomfortably close to the physical reality of the violence, heightening the tension by shifting the audience's perspective from fearing the malicious teens to fearing the vengeful teacher. Christopher Stryker provides a memorable counterweight as Dickens, the volatile, charismatic ringleader of the teenagers whose arrogant exterior completely shatters as the tables turn. The production leans heavily on disturbing, tactile practical effects and physical stunts, using the desolate, swampy marshes and claustrophobic house interiors to stage brutal, desperate confrontations. It stands as a fascinating, overlooked gem of the late VHS era, a cynical, pitch-black look at small-town cruelty and the cycles of violence that proudly avoids generic slasher clichés. The Mutilator, 1984. What begins as a harmless fall break turns into a nightmare when college student Ed Jr. invites his friends to his family's beach house. The group expects a weekend of relaxation, but lurking in the shadows is Ed's estranged father, driven mad by grief after a tragic accident years earlier. As night falls, the reunion becomes a blood-soaked reckoning, with the friends caught in the middle of a twisted family vendetta. Directed by Buddy Cooper, The Mutilator is pure mid-80s slasher excess, remembered for its outrageous creativity in staging kills. Special effects artist Mark Shostrom, later known for his work on Evil Dead 2 and Phantasm 2, delivers some of the decade's most shocking gore sequences, from boat propellers to fishhooks. Everyday seaside tools become instruments of horror in scenes that leave a lasting impression. The cast, led by Matt Mittler as Ed Jr. and Ruth Martinez as his girlfriend Pam, bring a surprising sense of sincerity to their roles, grounding the story even as the violence escalates. Their performances make the horror personal, turning what could have been just another body count film into something more unsettling. What makes The Mutilator stand out is its unflinching blend of camp and brutality. It is messy, audacious, and unforgettable, with a tone that veers between playful and grotesque. And with its bizarrely cheerful theme song, it captures the strange contradictions that make so many slashers of the era fascinating. The Mutilator may not have had the polish of its bigger-budget peers, but its willingness to push boundaries secured it a lasting reputation. It is a cult favorite for fans who appreciate slashers that cut a little deeper.
If you enjoyed this trip through the vaults, check out the links in the description for more ways to support the channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time. And remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is somebody's favorite.